Today I'm going to show you how to plant a fruit tree. Orchards create brilliant habitat for wildlife and fruit for people to eat. So I'm going to show you how to do it properly. For this you'll need mulch mat, some gloves, bamboo pegs, cable ties, some staples or tacks, a lump hammer and a claw hammer, a rubber tree tie secateurs, a spade, a 60cm guard, some water, wood chip, a roll of mesh, a fruit tree, a tree stake and some square stakes. Okay, so I've picked my site for planting the tree. The grass has been cut nice and short before planting so that it doesn't grow up and compete with the tree. We're also planting at least 10 meters away from any other fruit tree, so this is the perfect site for it. Okay, so your tree should arrive from the nursery a bit like this, with the roots wrapped in a bag. So you just remove the bag to reveal the roots, and we want to make them nice and wet before we plant the tree to give them the best chance of survival. So the best way of doing this is just dip them into a bucket of water. And I'm just going to leave that tree there until I plant it. To plant the tree, we need to dig a square hole. The holes are dug square because it stops the roots just spinning round and round a circular hole. When they hit the corner of a square hole, they head out into the surrounding soil. So we're going to dig a 50 by 50 centimetre square hole. First I'm going to lay my mulch mat down next to the hole. This is to put everything that you dig out onto so that you can easily tip it back in when you've eventually planted the tree. So I'm going to start by scoring the shape of the hole with the spade. So it's a roughly 3 spade widths wide, 2 to 3 spade widths wide, and then you cut a little cross into it so that it can come out in 4 pieces. So I'm going to lift up these 4 bits of turf, and as I do, remove as much soil as possible from the base to keep these 4 chunks of turf and set them aside on your mulch mat. So now I've taken the top layer of turf off, and I'm going to dig a hole about 2 spade depths deep in this square hole. And just make sure you're putting all of the spoil from the hole onto the mulch mat. So as you're digging, you can check that whether the hole is deep enough by comparing it to the size of the tree roots. It's definitely good to dig a hole bigger than the roots of your tree to give it lots of loose soil for the roots to grow into. So I think that's deep enough. To check whether it is, you're aiming to plant so that the tree sits in the soil just where the roots start appearing from the stem. You can lay a bamboo cane or a stake across the hole just to compare the soil surface with the roots of the tree, just to check how deep you need it to go. Now that I know it's deep enough, I'm still going to loosen and remove some soil from the base of the hole to give the tree roots lots of space to grow. Now to hammer in the stake. So we do this before planting the tree so that the stake can be really nice and vertical and parallel to the stem of the tree to keep the tree really solid and upright. Ideally you want the stake to be windward side of the tree, so the side that the wind comes from, so that the tree doesn't blow into it. It'll always blow away from the stake. I think the wind comes from over there, so I'm going to hit it in with a lump hammer. You want to leave roughly 1 metre of stake above the soil. So you can check that it still fits by comparing the roots to the hole, and just make sure the stem is parallel at the top to the stake that you've just hammered in. Fruit trees, because they're grafted, they start off with a bit of a curve at the base of the stem, so you want to check that it's parallel at the top. So that looks good to me. So the next thing to do is put the turf into the bottom of the hole. Grass competes with the tree for water and nutrients, so you really don't want grass around the base of the tree. So the way we deal with this is just to put any of the turf that you've cut off at the start right at the bottom of the hole, and it will just compost down. If you've got too much and it doesn't fit in, you can just discard that. but ideally you should be able to fit everything you dug out into the back of the hole when you replant the tree. So just make sure you haven't filled it up too much so that the tree sits too high. Again, I can compare it using my stake to the top of the turf, and it looks a little bit too high now, so I'm going to take a bit out. There we go. So now you can start filling in with the soil that you dug out. This is really nice loose soil, so it should all go in quite easily and fill in the gaps. If you have heavy clay soil, you might have to break up some of the chunks of clay quite a lot. So you're trying to fill in all of the gaps of air around the roots. So as you do it, as you fill it in with your hands, you can just shake the tree, and that should allow the soil to settle around the roots. So shake it as you go, trying to make sure that the top roots will just sit at the surface or just below the surface of the soil. You can also give it a firm down with your foot just to make sure the soil is not got any air gaps, but is not too compacted. You don't want to really stamp on it. And that should just allow you to get the rest of the soil in. So you can sort of tip any of the remaining soil in off your mulch mat. That's why we use the mulch mat to put the soil on, because it helps get it all back into the hole. So now the tree is planted, we want to add a mulch mat, a tree tie and some guards to protect it from browsing by deer and rabbits, and also to minimise the amount of grass competition around the base of the tree. So I'm first of all going to use this mulch mat to line up the slit in the mat with the tree and the stake so that it gets nice and close and sort of cuts out any potential for grass to grow through it. I just overlap it slightly, and then I'm going to use some bamboo pegs to peg it down. So with the bamboo pegs you can either just push them through the mat, or I find it easier just to hammer them in with a heavy lump hammer. They should have a little barb on them to act like a little hook to stop the mat levering up. So one in each corner, then one in the middle, and then two to seal up this slit in the mat. Then to protect it from browsing by voles and rabbits, you want to put a guard around the base. This is a wrap guard, but you can also use a spiral type guard that you can wind round the tree. You might just have to sort of adjust it to get it to fit round the curve in the tree. But that now sits really nicely on the soil just above the mulch mat. The final bit for keeping the tree upright is to add a tree tie. This is a rubber tie that's adjustable, so as the tree grows you can loosen it over time. There should be one side with kind of rough texture and maybe some writing on, and then a smooth side. You want to use that smooth side in conjunction with this buckle to make a little loop around the tree. So it acts like a bit of a belt around the tree with the buckle holding it on, and then you have another buckle here and the tail of the tie that you fasten it to the stake with. So it should be nice and snug on the stem of the tree, and then you can just wrap it around the stake, pull it through, and then thread it through again to tighten it. So that should stop the tree falling over, just tilting over due to the weight of any apples on it. Sometimes the tie can slip down the stem of the tree though, so it's a good idea to fasten it to the stake with a staple or a felting roof tack. So that little staple will just hold the buckle part of the tie there, and then if you ever need to loosen it, you can just undo this side and push it through and it'll happily loosen. So that just keeps it from dropping down the stake. If your tie is really long, you can cut that bit off with secateurs. So now is a good time to water the tree just before you put any wood chip mulch on. It just keeps the soil nice and damp. So I like to soak the mulch mat around the entire root zone, and that just gives the tree a good starting off. Then we want to mulch the tree with at least a wheelbarrow full of mulch. So when you're mulching, you want to make sure that none of the mulch is touching the base of the tree. That's to stop any of the fungus that rots down the wood chip rotting the tree. So you mulch in a kind of donut shape with a nice thick layer all around the base of the tree, but just with a gap in the middle. So it's really important to prune your fruit tree after you've planted it. When you get a fruit tree from the nursery, it will have been pruned, but it's usually to fit it into the box to send it to you. They'll often come with more branches than you need your tree to have, so it's really important to prune it immediately after planting. The idea is to have 3 to 5 main branches heading out in all different directions, and you prune off anything that is growing back into the centre of the tree or is growing sort of above another branch, so it would shade that branch out. So I'm going to prune off this one, and this one. It seems quite brutal, but it sets your tree up for a really nice solid branch structure. Then just prune to a bud that's facing in the direction you want the branch to grow in. So with this leader, I want it to grow that way, so I'm going to prune to this bud, so just above it, at a slight angle to stop water pooling on it. And this one I'm going to prune to here, to aim the branch out that way. So that should create a nice open goblet shape for the tree. So this is the very basics of planting, what we've done so far, and that will protect the tree against rabbits. If you were grazing the field with sheep or cattle, you need some really solid posts that will stop the animals being able to reach the tree. But in this case, the only thing that there's a risk of here is deer. So we're going to guard with just some plastic mesh which will stop them being able to reach the tree. So these come in big rolls, so you need to cut it to size and just make sure it fits precisely around the square of mulch that you've got around the tree. I'm going to fasten it individually to each post with a adjustable cable tie, and that should just mean that if you ever want to get into the guard to do any maintenance, for example hand weeding or adding some more mulch, you can just release one of these cable ties and open up the guard. So they easily just fit through the mesh and you can just tighten them on nice and securely. So I will add one somewhere along each of these 4 stakes. So now the tree is planted. That's not the end of the work with this tree. It needs regular maintenance. So fruit trees need annual pruning. So apple trees you'd prune in the winter, and stone fruit you'd prune sometime in the summer. They also need weeding and remulching and loosening any of the ties so they're not getting too tight and restricting the tree. Eventually, we should be able to remove these guards when the tree's big enough to withstand any browsing or deer that want to come and eat it. That was how to plant a fruit tree. If you want to see how to plant a woodland, hedgerow or specimen tree, check out some of our other videos.